Hi, I'm Katie Kahn. In the next 4 videos, I'm going to show you how I use this pattern to make this dress. It's a lot of work, so let's get started. Okay, let's start at the beginning. I saw this pattern, Vogue 1546, and I really like the cut of this dress. The halter is nice, the open back is cool, plus I'm a sucker for pleats. So I thought about what fabrics I have, because I do have a bit of a fabric hoarding problem. So I'm giving myself a challenge to only use what I already have for all of these projects until I run out of fabric. Anyway, the fabric that came to mind for this dress is this laser-cut foil-coated spandex. But I don't care for this horizontal seam at the hips, and I want to add some binding to the edges. Also, I want to break up the front bodice a bit with this cool embossed leather, so I'm going to add a yoke and a belt. I've drawn on the pattern where I want to add style lines and binding, and then I also have these fun little spiders. So I want just one, bonk, right there on the yoke. I'm going to line the bodice with this lightweight cotton poplin. And I'm going to flatline the entire dress with this matte satin to give it a nice weight and a little pop through the holes in the laser cut fabric. I'm also going to use this for the binding. I spent a lot of time draping on my mannequin to decide what grain line to use aesthetically and what lining to use for functionality. The foil-coated spandex is a stretch fabric, it's a knit, but I don't like the look of it when it's stretched, which is why I'm flatlining it with a woven fabric, and I picked this matte satin because it gives the spandex a nice drape. After I made my fabric selections, I cut little samples and made mock-ups to test how they sew together in the different grain lines. I also checked how the darts will sew and tested how I'll be attaching the binding. I can't do a proper binding at the bodice because of the way the back attaches, so you'll get to see how I do fake bindings, which is kind of fun. I always make little mock-ups when I'm using a new fabric or new technique, so pretty much everything I make gets a little mock-up of some kind. I don't know if you can see how purplish-bluish my fingers are. That's because the foil-coated spandex is crocking, which is where the dye comes off onto whatever it's rubbing against. So I'm going to wash this fabric, and I'll wash the cotton lining too. Now to select a size. Going off the measurements, I should wear a 6 for the top and an 8 for the skirt. But on the pattern, I see the finished waist measurement listed, and there's 3 inches of ease, which is just too much for me. So I'm going to cut this in a size 6 for everything and see how it goes in the fitting. Now I want to transfer the paper pattern pieces to real paper. I iron the pattern with low heat and no steam, pressing on the back of the tissue paper so it will lay flat. I'm using a tracing wheel to transfer the pattern lines and markings onto dotted paper for each piece that I'll need. Then I can draw it back out in pencil and label the pattern piece. After I've traced out all of the pattern pieces, I like to go through and trim all of the 5/8 inch seam allowances down to 1/2 inch. So I'm going to take 1/8 inch off all the seams. I don't take it off of the hems, and I definitely don't take it off the folds. At the waist, it looks like the bodice curves up in the front, but I want it to go straight across, so I'm going to give it a 2-inch seam allowance and pin it right where I want it in the fitting. I marked out the stitch line and then added the seam allowance from there. Continue the darts into the new seam allowance and then cut out the pattern pieces. Here, everything is cut, and I'm going to combine the upper and lower skirt pieces so there's no weird hip seam. This is the upper back skirt, and this is how the pleats are supposed to go together. But flat, you can see how much is taken out of each side. Normally I would slash and spread the lower skirt panel, but that will give me a huge skirt, and it'll be way too wide for my fabric. So what I'm going to do instead is slash inside each pleat and spread it to line up with the lower skirt. First, I'm marking 1 inch below the top of the lower skirt panel, which is where I want the upper skirt panel to line up. This is one of the nice things about working with 1/2 inch seam allowances. So I'm slashing the pattern, making straight cuts through it, and spreading the fullness between each pleat. I'm lining it up on the 1 inch line as much as possible and taping it down. Then tape it onto another piece of pattern paper to fill in the holes. And tape some more. Then draw across the top of each new part of the pleats and cut off the excess. Now I'm folding the pattern to line up the end points of the pleats and marking where the notches are going to be because some of them are different now. I'm notching and punching the holes for the pleats to finish the pattern. Now the same thing on the front. Not as much difference here, so I'll just need little pieces to fill in the gaps. Now the pattern is ready to try out, so I'm going to cut it out of muslin. I'm only cutting the front and back skirt and the front and back bodice for the fit sample. Line up the pattern pieces to the grain of the muslin and cut, notch, and mark the holes. With the cut muslin pieces, we can start sewing the fit sample. First, I'm going to mark the darts and pin them. It's best to sew from the edge of the garment and end at the point of the dart. When you get to the end of the dart, your stitch should be right at the edge of the fabric. Don't back tack. Instead, pull the fabric back and leave long thread tails. Then use a pin to tie a knot in the threads right at the base of the dart. Smooth the darts around a ham to press the darts the way the pattern suggests. Now I can mark the 2-inch seam allowance on the front bodice. I'm cutting a bit of twill tape for the halter ties and sewing them at the shoulder seams. I'm also going to finish the neckline, so I'm going to stitch at a 1/2 inch. This gives me a mark and a sturdy point to snip the curve to. Plus it makes folding back the edge easier. So I'm snipping at the curve anywhere that it looks like the fabric is puckering when I try to fold it under. Then press the fold and sew it down. Repeat for the arm curves. For the back pieces, I don't want to bother with the zipper for the fit sample, I'm just going to pin it on myself. So I'm going to sew the center back closed and leave a side seam open. Then I can finish the top and bottom at a 1/2 inch like I did on the front bodice. I'm only going to sew the left side seam, matching the upper edges, then press it toward the front and top stitch the seam allowance down. I'm leaving the other side open for the fitting. The first thing I want to do on the skirt is sew the center back starting at the notches. Then sew the side seams, matching the notches. Now I'm going to line up and pin the pleats. An easy way to do that is to put a pin through one dot, and then pin through the middle of the other dot and push the fabric to the base of the pin. Now you can smooth the fold and pin the pleats in place. Then mark the stitch line if you didn't do that earlier. Okay, it's all pinned and ready to be sewn. Back tack, sew one side of the pleat, then stop with the needle down in the middle of the dot. Lift the presser foot to pivot the fabric and then finish sewing the pleat. Back tack again at the end. After those are all sewn, you can press the side seams and center back open. Then press pleats as shown according to the pattern, so the front pleats fold towards center front and the back pleats fold toward the front, except for the one closest to the side, which has to fold back. I really don't like this pleat, it looks weird in the picture, it doesn't make sense here, I'm probably going to get rid of it, but I'll wait for the fitting to be sure. As I'm pressing the pleats, I'm also pinning them in place. Then I'm sewing the pleats down around the entire waist of the skirt. The instructions say cut away the excess inside the pleat, but I don't like to do that. I'll show you why in the fitting. Okay, so now I have the bodice and skirt sewn and ready to fit. I'm leaving them separate so I can pin them together in the fitting. I also cut extra strips of muslin and finished the edges to 1.5 inches. I'm going to use these for a belt and pin that in place in the fitting also. So we'll do the fitting in the next video.